You're listening to the #1 podcast show, Brother to Brother, with hosts Courtney, Anthony, and Christian, where we mentor our boys to be kings. Never miss an episode by listening every Thursday from 8 to 9 p.m. Check us out at www.brotherstalk.com. To join the conversation, call us at 917-889-7895.
So tonight we're actually going to go back in history and talk about things that have happened post-slavery and also things that are currently happening now and why a lot of stuff shows that things have been repeating itself, especially in the past 5 years. I am not hosting the show. I am Ross, and I'm here with my co-host Courtney, who will be hosting the show tonight, and I'll follow his lead. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Rock. And so basically this week and next week will be a two-part series. We thought, there are things that we'll go over in the future, but thought that we'd touch on a few things. So this one is going to be on the war on black people in America, specifically.
Okay.
So I kind of wanted to start it around the end of slavery, actually. So I'm going to kind of preface it by starting out. Well, actually, I'm going to go a little bit further into the future. So I'm going to, and this will kind of set up a background for why we actually go through the things that we do, why all these things have happened to us since even before we came to the Americas. But our history and just the terrible atrocities that have actually taken place. So I kind of want to start off with Frances Cress Welsing. If you guys aren't familiar with her, she wrote the ISIS papers, which was the keys to the colors. And basically, what I'm going to speak on is white genetic annihilation, the roots of white supremacy. That's what she coined the term. So basically, with her, I'm just going to read this off to you. So in her groundbreaking book, The ISIS Papers, The Keys to the Colors, she explains racism, quotations, white supremacy, and its roots. So the definition of racism is white supremacy. White supremacy is a global power system of mass oppression, a war against people of color in general, blacks in particular. There is no individual who is the head racist or leader of all white supremacists, thus making it difficult to nail down its locus of power. One of its greatest strengths, racism, white supremacy, functions on an elite level and on a mass level. Like a massive bureaucracy, white power is wielded by a network of powerful and influential individuals and institutions linked together by the common goal of dominating the world's people of color, especially black. In order to ensure white genetic survival, this elite, which comes from the government, the military, big business, and an assortment of secret societies, are responsible for formulating the strategy, tactics, objectives, and philosophical justifications necessary to achieve their goal. Now, with racism, she says, however, it is not confined to a cultural elite. It is a universally operating system of white supremacy and domination in which the majority of the world's white people. So as a system of thought, speech, and action, racism, racial prejudice, influences everything they actually do. And to go forward, she says, racism is a cultural prerogative handed down either consciously or unconsciously from generation to generation. White supremacy, as the term suggests, refers to a system of domination. Domination is a consequence of power. White power, when exercised among white people, is perfectly legitimate. However, when exercised among non-white, it is the white supremacy and thus illegitimate. And it goes on further. Let's see. The purpose root of racism, the root of racism is fear. So this is what what it's all about. So the root of racism is fear. We don't really think about it like this. When we think about racism and the things that happen to us, we often think of it as an individual thing. You think of it as the specific police officer who did you wrong, or the white person in your office who did you wrong, and things like that. But what she has here is the root of racism is actually fear. Fear of white genetic annihilation. Europeans, and this isn't for you kids to go to school and mention this to your teachers or your classmates. But
let me say something before you continue with the racism. I think what a lot of people have to understand is that this racism was born out of a system that happened after we were released, and after we were emancipated. Released sounds so slave-like mentality, but after we were emancipated, because when we as people was emancipated, they could no longer get free labor from us. So after the emancipation, they started putting certain things in system or in place for us to still be stifled from growth. One of the things I do know is, especially what's happening today with the whole Trump campaign that he ran on, was based off of fear. So prior to us, once we got released, that's the same thing that happened back in the 1800s, specifically around the 1880s and the 1890s. They started to put fear into the poor whites about how blacks were going to act. And from that point on, that actually spun into the whole racist mentality in which white supremacy was born out of. So I wanted to say that. And I think a lot of times people don't understand. I don't want to make an ignorant comment, but I do have to say this, and I know a lot of people might give me flack for it. I'm a Caribbean male, and I understand my heritage. And a lot of times when I speak to some Americans, I won't say all or a lot of times when I speak to some Americans, I think where the breakdown is that they don't necessarily talk about their history, especially with the younger generation, because you and I are around the same age, and so we know what it is to come from the 1970s and the 1960s because our parents lived it. So, but anyways, I'll let you continue with the racism.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Where did I leave off? Okay, so as a race, Europeans or whites are numerically a minority in the world, a reality exacerbated by their declining birth rate. People of color represent the overwhelming majority of the world's nearly 7 billion inhabitants. The creators of racism, who have been the historical enemy of the majority of the world's population. So when it really comes to the elite, they have their pick of who they care for, but really, they would prefer population to be down across the board, but specifically about, when it comes to races that are different from theirs. So basically, I'll just round this off. So basically, when it comes to Ms. Wells, and what she's saying is white people are actually recessive, and black is dominant. So when it comes to genetics, they want to keep their numbers as high as possible because they've always been the minority on the planet. They came to the planet later than us. We may touch on that later if we have time. They actually produce a lot less than us, even though we're getting killed off in mass, and we will definitely touch on that. White people have had a zero population growth or a very slow birth rate around the world. So when they look at us, it's like I want to say, it's not the way that we've always thought or the way that we've been taught. It's not a thing of them not liking us because we look different or because we are different. When it really comes down to it, subconsciously, or consciously on that level, they actually fear their own demise because of our numbers. All right.
Okay. Let me ask you a question, because you just said something that just intrigued me. You're saying that you said that it's not, they don't fear us because of our color. Is that what you're picking up from the article?
No. I was just trying to relate to the world. I guess the way I've always looked at the world, or how I've always looked at America. I've always looked at it like I've never looked at it as in they fear their survival. I always looked at it as in they just dislike us for whatever reason, a myriad of reasons. With the stuff that we're going to talk about today, and I actually found out quite a bit of stuff that I should have known and did not know. We'll definitely start to understand what's going on and their relation to us. All right. Okay. So that was the first. Yeah, that was the first thing I wanted to touch. Go ahead.
Okay. I think I now, mind you, I always have to preference to give a disclaimer, because a lot of times when I say stuff, it comes off kind of harsh, I have a lot of friends and a lot of family members that are multicultural.
Right.
And I don't necessarily think that I don't have any white friends, I should say, because that was where the article is coming from. I don't have any white friends that do not understand the stuff. I don't have any white friends that don't. Most of them understand, because either they came from the middle class or they grew up around black people, so they've seen the injustice that blacks have had to face, as well as Mexicans that have had to face in this society. They've also expanded their knowledge to have empathy in other people. But for the most part, for those individuals who are non-black and non-Hispanic, I tend to think, because of a lot of the rhetoric and the propaganda that has been spewed, mainly throughout the media and stuff like that, they do fear black people, mainly because of their skin. And I would say they typically fear darker-skinned black people than they do lighter-skinned black people. So I don't necessarily agree with what this particular lady said in her article, that it's not born out of fear, because if you see back in history, as we were talking about post-slavery, a lot of the things that they were saying about slavery, we were going to be savage, we were going to take their jobs. It's still the same thing that they're saying about Mexicans today. But so I think a lot of times, because of the propaganda that was spewed from people that hated non-whites, I think it is born out of skin color versus out of just the way that we act. Because the first thing you see, because when you walk up to a white person, they don't know you from anywhere. So when the first thing that they see is your skin color, and that already instills fear into them. And I don't want to say all white people, just a subset of white people. And I would say typically the subset of white people, older white Americans, because they came from a time where they had that instilled from them from their grandparents or their great-grandparents or even their parents. So a lot of the stuff that people hold on to is, even as black Americans and older Hispanics, a lot of the stuff that they hold on to comes from the generation before them. And they pass it on down to instill the same fear that they were taught. So, but anyway, we can move on to the next topic, unless you have a rebuttal for that.
No, I see what you're saying, but the way you're mentioning it is the way that I've always started it. So let me go on to the next part. Okay, so what we have is so around, how can I start this? All right, so we're all familiar with Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust and what he did in Germany. Everybody's familiar with that. That's brought up all the time. What nobody really mentions is the fact of, or anybody ever questioned, I never hear anybody question, where did he get his ideas from? Now that's the thing that I actually didn't realize until I was in school. Adolf Hitler actually got his idea from America. So
correct, yeah.
It started with eugenics. You familiar with that?
I am. You know, amazingly, when I was researching the topic before I watched the video that you sent, it actually was on my computer for me to read over, but the video actually highlighted a lot of stuff that I knew and that I did not know. So, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that still. I was speaking to a friend today about the podcast, and I mentioned eugenics, and she only knew a little portion of it. So hopefully this podcast, even though right now it sounds like it's a negative thing, hopefully in the end they're going to understand why we brought up this particular topic. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, all right, so I'll explain. So eugenics is, eugenics from what we were taught in school, or what if you've heard of Darwinism, that's what I always refer to eugenics as. But let me just read one of the definitions that's listed here. So the word eugenics, which means well-born, was coined in 1883 by Sir Francis Galton, who is actually a cousin of Charles Darwin. Positive eugenics was a movement that attempted to improve the human population by encouraging fit people to reproduce. Negative eugenics, conversely, is attempted to improve the human population by discouraging unfit people from reproducing. The unfit people included the poor, the sick, the disabled, the feeble-minded, the idiots, the morons, and the insane. And discouragement from reproducing included the use of force. Now, of course, we're bringing this up as black people because when it comes down to it, it was actually started to decrease our population. So basically, what these guys, their idea was that it was, they actually thought it was a good idea for the world population to go down, and particularly those who were not like them. So I believe it actually started with Thomas Malthus. And Thomas Malthus, people followed him like Darwin and like this guy, Sir Francis Galton. But hold on one second.
Can I jump in real quick? Okay, this is the understanding that I got from eugenics, outside of what you just read. From the reading, and I'm not sure if it's 100% clear or will be clear, but from the reading, Charles Darwin, right? If I'm saying it correctly, Darwin actually spoke about evolution as far as how species advance, versus what his cousin did was when he created the eugenics, he counteracted what Charles Darwin was saying as far as evolution goes. So Charles Darwin, to me, was more on the positive side of how people are formed, versus his cousin wanted to extinct certain population or certain minorities. When you mention like feeble-minded and poor, and so I don't know. I don't know necessarily if the correlation between the two for some people is accurate. And I'll probably have to do additional research on Darwin and his theories. But from what I gather, the eugenics, when it started, it was actually to counteract whatever he had already decided was going to be like the evolution of individuals. So, but I'll let you continue.
Well, honestly, I don't think either one of them was positive, but what I will say is Galton just had a clear goal. That's the difference between the two. So basically, when it came to this guy, they called him the father of eugenics and coined the term in 1883 in order to promote the idea of eugenics. It said it galvanized the society that began in America with the sole intent of wiping out the black population through selective breeding and sterilization. In secret, it played a significant role in the culture of the United States to its involvement in World War II. Today it's more recognizable in institutions like Planned Parenthood and are advancing the eugenics movement against the black community. Now, are you familiar with Planned Parenthood?
I am, but we also have to tell them how it got to that level of being Planned Parenthood. So if you want to, we can go back until it's up to you if you want to jump around. But I think because here's the thing, I had a friend one time. We had actually we don't speak anymore like we used to, but I had a friend that was defending. I was defending abortion rights, and my friend was not, because she came from a Christian standpoint. I took Christianity out of it, but she did not. So I've always defended abortion rights and for women to choose to have their child and not have their child. In especially when it comes to like incest and rape, they have a right to have an abortion. That was my thought before, and on still some levels, I still think the same thing. But I think what our audience needs to understand is how it got to be Planned Parenthood and why eugenics is still prevalent today in Planned Parenthood. So I'm not sure if you want to touch that topic.
Oh, absolutely. I do want to touch that topic. So this guy's idea led to, and by the way, if his name is familiar, it's because Hillary Clinton brought her up as one of her heroes, or she agreed with her views. But later on, this lady named Margaret Sanger founded the American Birth Control League. And before I get into that, let me go back to what you were just saying. So I'm going through this information because it's information. It's stuff that we need, stuff that most people do not know, which is why we engage in the things that we do. When it comes to abortions and things like that, I'll just be honest with you. The ideas, I've just always had an open mind. If things do not affect me, I've always just learned how to keep my mouth quiet. So when it comes to abortions, pro-choice, pro-life, I never got into any of that anyway. Number one, because I'm not a woman. Number two, it's because it never affected my life in any way. So I never had an opinion either way. But after reading through this stuff, I will be honest with you, I do have an opinion when it comes to people of color. I think that we need to have our children. If for no other reason, the fact that it's a lot because of our enemy does not want us to have our children. All right. So Margaret Sanger founded the American Birth Control League in 1921. It was a facility with the purpose of sterilizing women, realizing that they wouldn't be able to promote, their agenda because it would be viewed as socially unacceptable and politically incorrect. In 1942, Sanger officially changed the name of the American Birth Control League to Planned Parenthood, concealing its agenda of population control. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, now, okay. You said something, but I'm not even going to touch that. One of the, you remember when we were talking about the eugenics, part of their discussion as to why I got to Planned Parenthood, from my understanding and what I have read and researched, is that I can't remember the guy's name that started the whole eugenic process, Darwin's cousin. When he started the whole eugenic, one more time.
Francis Galton, sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. When he started the whole eugenic process, it was just his theory as far as what he wanted to implement, because there was a lot of letters going back and forth as far as how he wanted to get rid of certain people in their community, poor, Mexicans, blacks, or African American, however you want to say it, and feeble-minded. And around this time that he was trying to promote the whole eugenics is when Margaret Sanger actually came up with the idea of having birth control. And I think at one point she tried to run for office, but she did not have the financing to run for office. So one of the individuals that she turned to was, you said Dalton? Is Dalton. And he's the one that finds Francis. We'll say Francis because I can't remember everybody's name. But he is the one that funded her. He was the one that funded her her move to go into some type of political arena. When she entered into the political arena throughout history, they no longer could use the word control, because really that's what it was in all of his writing that I've seen, is they wanted to control the masses. And one of the letters that he wrote was, we can no longer have control, because remember when they released slaves, they released at least 4 million slaves. So now from that point on, they were like, how can we put certain stuff in place so that way they cannot continue reproducing? So when he funded her efforts, the birth control out for her to get into this political arena, that's how they started weaning away from the word control, and they said it needed to be planning, from my understanding. And from that point on is how we got to Planned Parenthood. Now, mind you, before it became Planned Parenthood, there was more whites having abortion than blacks. And then we'll talk about how the ties have switched between blacks and whites, as far as blacks and minorities such as Mexicans are now the highest population of having abortion. I'll let you continue. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, you're good. And also another thing, just tells you how direct it was at first. It was actually called the Negro Project. Mm-hmm. It was originally called that before it became Planned Parenthood. Because I'll be honest with you, growing up in the hood, there was one probably about a mile and a half from my grandmama's house. And I used to pass by almost every day. And it just looks like in a benign place. It doesn't look like anything serious. You see teenage girls, young women coming in and out of there from time to time. But I didn't think anything of it until years later. But so basically they started this to start lowering our population. They started putting these places all throughout the black community and in minority communities, period. But if you ever notice, when you're driving through a white community, you will never find a Planned Parenthood facility.
That is true.
And the whole idea from it for basically was, they're already killing us off other type of ways. But the best way possible to lower a group of people's population is for them to never be born in the first place. So that was the point of the Negro Project, which was later changed to Planned Parenthood. But, reading through this stuff, I found out some other stuff that I absolutely never heard of. Were you familiar with the fact that they've been practicing sterilization in the United States going back for over 70 years at this point? Were you familiar with that also?
I know the sterilization, but let me say this when it comes to the whole Planned Parenthood, because I'm not sure if you actually went into because before Planned Parenthood became what it was, you remember for years a lot of people was against having such a clinic as Planned Parenthood. So that's why before it became legal, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it became legal in the 1960s is when the whole legal abortion came about. But before it became illegal, they said that 80% of white women was having more abortion than any other race of minorities, and that even included poor whites. So the upper class women were having abortions, but you also have to remember back in those days, the government also set in place where people had to have permits to have children. Mainly blacks, they had to have permits to at least have one child. That is how China works now, and that's also how Germany, when Hitler was in control, worked as well. So I think what a lot of people don't understand, that even though we're looking, especially in America, you know how we always say how some Americans they always look at another country and can't believe that that country is doing what they're doing to their people, and fail to realize that we have done the same thing and continue to do the same thing to our own people. But
not only
so
do we
concerned.
Not only do we do the same thing, we actually start. It's just that we don't know about what happened, because of the lack of, we don't have propaganda about stuff like that in America. We will find out about what happened in other parts of the world, but they don't talk about it here. So
because it's all a conspiracy, right? That's how it feels. It's like a conspiracy. And I think a lot of people don't understand is that around this time when Hoover, Nixon, and Reagan was in office, they continued to put in place the same type of things that still affect us, such as when blacks wanted to own property, we were denied property rights. We was oftentimes forced off our property. They came in and they killed the American Indians just to control their land. And so now the American Indians grew from over 3 million to, I think they said the reservation now is less than 1 million people. So I think a lot of times we, in our history, even though people like to think that we're separate, history has shown that we are all the same, no matter what skin tone we are, no matter what level of the socioeconomic status we are, we're all the same. But back to the abortion, when we talk about Eugenics, right? That's how I said it. I'm sorry. When it became so when it became popular in the 1960s, as I was saying, that's when the tide switched between more minorities was having, about 80% of minorities was having abortion, which lessened the population for us as well, minorities in general, and it increased or shrinked the populations for white. But what I found interesting when we speak about blacks is that they were saying that black women make up off the video that I watched, and it seems like it was a video that was done back in 2015, but did a history of our people. And they say that black women at the time made up 13% of the population, but 37% of the population that actually had more abortions than any other race, which I found interesting.
Absolutely.
So,
and this was a pretty recent notice that Planned Parenthood has continued the practice of targeting the black population. Over 30% of all abortions are performed on black women, and close to 40% of black. Now, you got to think about the math on this. And over 40% of black pregnancies end in abortion. Now, think about that number. That means, so 40% of our women who are getting pregnant are not even having their baby. Now, we're not talking about stillborn. We're not talking about infant
miscarriages.
What do you call it? Infants die. I can't think of the term. We're not talking about kids who are dying during childhood. We're talking about children who are dying before they're even born. But the other races are not having this issue. And this, these things are not by accident. This has been their goal for a long time.
Did you see the video when they were asking people what is the number one killer of blacks, and everybody was like gang violence, HIV, but it's actually abortion. And it's interesting because a lot of people who may not support abortion do not realize their money that they're working for go towards places like Planned Parenthood. So
it's a $1 billion industry. It is and the thing is, the people who run are some of the most famous people in the world, some of the richest people in the world. You're talking about people like Bill Gates, the Clintons. Wait, I'm trying to think. I think I saw the Clintons name. But
we can't. Let me say this. And I hate to say it because I hate to say this because sometimes we look at other races, which is crazy. We look at other races and think, like, for instance, let's take Hillary Clinton. I am somewhat of a fan of the Clintons. I'm not that big of a fan, but I'm somewhat of a fan. But we take the Clintons and we look at them, and they're like, oh, they've done so much for the black race. In essence, what has happened over a period of time is they started taking money from Planned Parenthood, so now that gets pushed under the rug. But that also happened when Jesse Jackson was running for presidency at one point, because before he started running for presidency, he used to write a lot of letters saying and also do public speaking, talking about how this eugenics and Planned Parenthood and stuff like that was trying to end our population. But as soon as he started running for presidency, he decided that he needed money to fund his presidential campaign. And who did he turn to? He turned to people like Planned Parenthood. That's
the sad part of it, brother. How can I put this? I don't want to say this for everyone, but it's pretty much across the board. Whenever you see a black person rise very far in politics, they can only help us so much. And the reason being is that was a perfect example. Jesse Jackson did see what was going on and was speaking about it, but once it was time for him to really move up, he needed money. So who would back him? The same people who were destroying his own people. And that's how they control you. And that was actually going to be the next thing I wanted to touch on. I can't remember if I sent you this information, but have you ever heard of the NSSM 200?
I only through what you sent me, but before this, no.
Okay, sorry about that. So let me just go across that. This was some amazing information. So the NSSM, I believe this was done around 1974. It was a meeting with a bunch of global elites to figure out basically what to do about the population around the country. So
wait, before you continue, can I ask a question? Which it just came up, and I'm sorry to cut you off. But when we were talking about abortions not necessarily being something. I'm quoting you what you were saying. You think differently about abortions now than you did before you started doing the research and what we're talking about because of how it's connected to eugenics. But in a sense, and now I'm just going to play devil's advocate. I love my people, first off. I can tolerate my people to some degree. Let me say it that way. But I actually do get a little pissed off when you see young people of color who are pregnant and under the age of 18 because they are either too loose because of whatever reason. You know, a lot of times we don't know what's going on in that individual's life. They could have been molested or raped and stuff like that, so I can understand that. But a lot of times you see a lot of these individuals who are young and I'll say not all the time so innocent, that is out there ripping and running the streets and whatever, and you see them pregnant and pregnant again. Don't you think that in that case that abortion should be done, or they should have an abortion? Because now they're contributing to, yes, our population growth, which is a good thing. However, the issue is those are the same type of people, I'm not saying all of them, but those are the same type of people that get access to a lot of benefits that is pulling out of the mouth of people that really need it. I'm sorry, that's just how I feel. So I think in some cases when I see young people, especially unmarried young women under the age of 18, because, you know, some women, they're older enough and they know better. And I even have an issue with that too. But a lot of times when you see these young people walking the street that are pregnant, that leaves a negative connotation in other people, especially our counterparts' head. And I don't believe that they should be having children at a young age. I hate to see a 15-year-old girl walking down the street with her child in one stroller, or even if she's pregnant. I believe in that case they ought to have abortion. So you wouldn't agree with that?
Oh man, you're going down a slippery slope, man.
I'm slippery. I'm controversial.
No. It's, you know, I mean, even kids understand this. It's gonna be tougher on you when you're very young, and if you're single, and if when you're having kids. It's just gonna be tough. It's not that it's impossible, but you're making your life. It's gonna be a little tougher on you. It's gonna be tough for that child that you have, but. And this is what this stuff we're going. This is the stuff we're reading out right now. You don't know what that child is going to turn to. That baby that you decide to abort. You don't know You don't know how that child's going to change your life. You don't know how your life is going to change. And you might be 19 years old and pregnant. Think, oh, I just went to college. I need, I can't have a baby right now. And then a couple years later. You make a couple great decisions. You're a millionaire. Now you're thinking, man, I'm 22. My baby would have, you start thinking about the decisions that you made at the time. And, I've known girls who have had them. And they, no matter how many kids they have later on in their life, they always think about the ones that are gone. So yeah, when it comes to that, and like I said, I've brought it up multiple times. I used to work in the schools. There's a school here. I don't know if you're familiar. It's it's on the east side. It's called Beta, and it was actually a school for pregnant girls. So I'd actually like to see how those girls turned out.
Isn't that like how Huntingford Prep was in Eatonville as well? Because Huntingford Prep at the time when it was open, they used to cater to people with severe behavioral problems as well as girls who were pregnant. And back in the days, it was actually a good school. I don't know why it actually closed its doors, but it was actually a decent school. And I think that was, but still, I know eugenics. I know our population is great. Our people are great. However, in my head, I still believe to some degree. And I think it's because I removed the eugenics side of it. I still believe in abortion, especially for young women under the age of 18. And I think when we talk about sterilization, the difference between, even though it's prevalent today, the difference between what's going on now back then is nowadays they have the option to choose versus when they were being sterilized, as we were going to talk about, they didn't have that option. So I don't know. Maybe somebody can change my mind. I have a friend that tends to, I don't want to say she tracks me, but the other day we was having a conversation, and I made a comment. I need to retract. So hopefully somebody can change my mind about the abortion aspect of it when it comes to young girls. But it's going to be an uphill battle if they speak to me, to be honest with you. But let's go on to the next topic because it's going to be a long one if we continue on that road.
Okay, no problem. So I was going to bring up the NSSM 200.
Okay.
Yeah, this goes back to the 70s. So this dealt with population around the world, and essentially what it was this was the idea for them to keep the races down, or should I say the undesirable races. So according to the NSSM 200, elements of the implementation of population control programs could include the legalization of abortion, financial incentives for, and this goes on today. And I heard somebody say, I don't believe in Obama because he's supposed to be a black president, but he brought stuff to Africa that white presidents weren't able to do. So, and this was new to me. I didn't know this. So when it comes to so basically with the NSS 200, they did all these studies on population growth in different countries, and they wanted to lower the population in other countries. And what they found out was no country, no matter how poor or how rich, no country had a decrease in population without what's the term I'm thinking of, man? Without abortion and without contraception, because there's a lot of countries who just don't believe in it. So basically, what they do now is go to these third world countries that are desperate. They're desperate for food. They're desperate for money, and they're basically like, we're not going to give you nothing. We're not going to give you anything at all unless you agree to our terms. And their terms are basically, we want you to kill yourself. And that's a hard way to say it, but that's essentially what they're doing. So they'll go to these small countries and say, okay, we're going to give you all this food. We're going to give you doctors. We're going to give you this, that, and the other. But you have to make this a national thing. You have to approve abortions across the board. You have to approve sterilization. You have to approve of contraceptives. And so basically they're feeding the ones who are alive, and they're going to start killing the ones who ain't born. And that's the plan. So these are the tenets of it: the legalization of abortion, financial incentives for countries who increase their abortion, sterilization, contraception use rate, indoctrination of children, and mandatory population control and coercion of other forms, such as withholding disaster and food aid unless an LDC implements population control programs. So,
they've done it to Haiti. That was one of that is one, and actually they've done it to Haiti. They've done it to India. They've done it to the Vietnamese. They've done it to the Japanese. So that's why it's important for people. That is why, to me, it's important that people understand their history, because our history interconnects all of us across the board. And I think you remember when we were talking about Adolf Hitler earlier, and back to what we're talking about now, is that the same organization that funded birth control is the same organization that did the gas chamber. I don't even know what it's called, but it's the same organization that produced the gas for all of those Jews to die in the gas chamber. So that's why it's important that people have to understand that we are all interconnected, no matter what race of people you are, no matter what socioeconomics. Because back then when we talk about race control, people don't realize that there were black Jews. And when Hitler picked up on these contraceptive and stuff like that, they started using it. They started using it in Germany to kill the black Jews as well as to kill Jews, because he wanted his people to be pure. And out of everything that they have done is how the Aryan nation came about. I know at one point it had died out, and after Hitler started coming back into, when Hitler started overthrowing the Germany and Poland and stuff like that, is how the Aryan nation started to come back stronger, basically. So it is, and I think he did the same thing to his people, or whatever was done is like he would withhold food. But all of these people come from, like, I would say the Jim Crow South, Francis. All of these people believe that it's funny. All of these people believed in one thing, and that's just to make a white nation. But they fail to realize that they actually brought us to these areas. But go ahead.
You got to think about it from their end. Their plan, I guess it was very short-sighted, but their plan was not for us to be their competition. They didn't plan on us to compete for jobs, compete for neighborhoods, compete for money. That wasn't why we were brought here. And it shows. We're gonna go over the, more of a history of black people and how black people were actually here before them. Anyway, we were here first. We were in other parts of the world first, and but this show this show isn't gonna go that much into that. But so basically, the problems with us. Go ahead.
Oh, so there's a video I want you to watch, and I have to look for it, but this is what the video said. When they originally brought slaves to the U.S., we were not enslaved people. We were actually free people. And not until they start bringing in the masses and seeing like how they can make money from the mass of people, how a lot of the free people was captured and then turned into slaves. And from that point on, we lived decades of being slaves up until, in some sense, we're still enslaved because we enslave ourselves, to be honest with you. But from the time that they started seeing that, hey, we could make a lot of money from slavery as free labor, they didn't have a problem with it until we got emancipated. So, and what people need to realize is that, and why we're talking about knowing our history as individuals, is because a lot of us, especially minority people, and I'm not just talking about blacks, I'm talking about poor whites, I'm talking about people that was disenfranchised, such as women who couldn't vote back in the days, and stuff like that. A lot of people have lent themselves and their talent to our country and countries around the world. And I think that's what the problem is when these elitists started to see that we were smarter than what they thought, is now they wanted to start this eugenics process across the country. Because remember, in Africa, they also started eugenics in the southern part of Africa because that is the common white area for the African nation. The population is more white than there is black. And they also try to implement the same eugenic process with birth control to control the masses in South Africa as well. So it's not only in the U.S. and Germany and stuff like that, it's just across the board. So a lot of those other countries got their ideas from our people. That's the thing. But it's a shame, man. It's crazy because, you know, a lot of times when we talk about race relations and stuff like that, the first thing that people want to do is get mad. I typically don't get mad. I just get knowledge, and that's it, because one of the greatest people that I've ever followed is Nelson Mandela, and he's always said, in order to beat your opponent, you have to understand them. So that's how I feel today, you know. So, but I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. And wow, we got 7 minutes, man. I thought we were gonna talk on some more topics, but yeah, this is interesting.
We can always touch on the topic next week on the next podcast, because this is I actually talked to this lady who's in law enforcement, and she actually wanted me to say certain things. But we can touch on more of the topics, even if it's down to 7 minutes next week, because this is a conversation that needs to be had. And a lot of times, let me say this, a lot of times when there's so much that goes on in our community with other people that don't necessarily understand us, and I mean Latinos, Hispanics, African-American, blacks, as well as poor individuals, Asians. There's so much that goes on in our community that people have to start opening up the dialogue in order to understand. And one of the things that I definitely want to say is that even if people call in next week, because I was trying to do it to where they could call in next week and not today, is that I never want people to feel like they're being judged when they call our show, because our show is meant to be inspiring to young men as well as inspiring to other people that listen. So hopefully, even though we touch on the topics of eugenics, and it did affect a lot of the blacks in mass, I don't want people to feel like they cannot have a voice to be heard, because, you know, a lot of times I think I know everything. You know, I'm just one of those people. I was like, I'm never wrong. However, I was proven to be wrong just the other day. So this is definitely a show for everybody to grow from, and then to open up dialogue, because I cannot understand. Well, I can. I know what white people go through. It's not that stressful. But just joking. I'm just joking. But we can't understand each other if nobody's willing to talk about it. So that's why this show, to me, is a good thing when it comes to especially this topic, because now it starts to get the ball moving in people's head, because they may have had conversations. You know how it is. People talk amongst themselves. They don't necessarily want to be heard because they feel like they're going to be judged. So for me, it's kind of like I just want it to be an open dialogue. So if anybody has to call in, and I didn't even mention the number throughout this process, and I didn't even play the intro, but if anybody wants to call in next week and let their voice be heard on this specific topic, or even if they want to email me, and I'll leave the information online, they can, and then we can read the comments or they can call in. But what other topic? We have 4 minutes, so if you want to touch on another topic, we definitely can.
Oh yeah, well, I intended the show to start around the time of the end of slavery. One of the topics that I found out recently. And by the way, did you see the movie, the recent one, The Birth of a Nation?
I've seen that. Wait, is this one that just came out in theaters?
No, it came out. Yeah, it came out probably about 6-7 months ago. It was a while back. But basically, it was about.
I've never seen it.
About the slave revolt. But the thing that I caught at the very beginning of the movie was slave patrols, and I don't think a lot of people realize that policing in this country actually began from slave patrols, and I believe it started in South Carolina. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. So.
Oh, okay, yeah. So basically, in South Carolina, the South Carolina General Assembly enacted a law requiring all white men over the age of 18 to participate in slave patrols, punishable by a fine of $2 and 10% of the offender's last taxes. So slave patrols in South Carolina were ongoing since 1671. Transformed in this movement from the responsibility of slave owners to the responsibility of all white trolls rode through the countryside and the cities, terrorizing any black person found outside after dark. So what a lot of people don't realize. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, what I was about to say is, in today's society, it's brought up about the crime in the minority communities and things, but people don't really realize that back then we didn't commit any crime. We were slaves. We were always watched. We were fed and things like that. So really, all the criminals were actually white people. However, they always had that fear of us rising up against them. They always had that fear of insurrection. So it started with actually independent white people patrolling their own area, which later turned into policing. And unfortunately, it's not always like that, but policing still kind of mirrors the way it was started, a couple hundred years ago.
But, that is crazy that you brought up. And you said that was 1671?
1671, they enacted that law.
I have to read up on that. I remember watching a video, which is a while ago, where they talked about after the emancipation how they wanted to keep us. Listen to this. There's a specific video, and I don't know the name of it right now because it's not coming to me. But after they ended slavery, then they started having us working in the railroads and stuff like that. But part of the policing that they did with us after slavery was we couldn't talk loud in the presence of white women. We could not sit on the street. We could not be out after dark. And anytime we was out after dark, and it's telling me that we have like 50 minutes, but anytime we was out after dark, they would arrest us. So it's crazy that how a lot of the slave patrols and how a lot of the stuff that was interacted back in the day still affects us today. This is what I want to do. We have to end the conversation real quick, but we will definitely be back next week with round 2 of the discussion, and that's when people can definitely call in and tell me if I'm wrong about abortion and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure some of my friends and family are listening, and they have a lot of choice words for me, so I'm going to have to hear the rap. But if anything, you have just listened to Brother to Brother, and we will definitely be back next week for round 2 of the same.
You just tuned in to Brother with hosts Courtney, Anthony, and Christian. Check us out at www.brotherstalk.com. Follow us on Facebook at Brother to Brother and Twitter at brothers_talk. Join us again next week as we continue to mentor our boys to be kings.